All right, there's an awkward silence in the room, which tells me that it's probably time for me to start ramping this thing together. First of all, can you hear me okay in the back? Can I get a shout if this volume's okay? Great. And to the live streamer, are we good? Great. My name is... Closer to the mic, though? Otherwise, I won't pick it up for the mic. How are we on this one? Good. Okay, even closer. Yeah. All right.
The pressure.
Well, my name is Daniel Reed, and I'll quickly tell you my side of the story, and then I'm going to hand it over to the stars of the show, which are my panelists today. I'm Daniel Reed with the LOR Foundation. We're a foundation that works across rural places in the Mountain West. We invest deeply in specific communities. Here in Idaho, that would be Weiser. But we also work on regional issues, and regional issues are things that affect every single person in the Mountain West. As we know, water is one of those issues. Over the past couple of years, we've been talking to community members, leaders, legislators about what are the core issues that you're seeing in your community and across the region. And they said water, water, and third of all, water. What we did earlier this year, actually last year, it's already 24, what we did is we launched an initiative called Fieldwork, where we supported 61 farmers and ranchers across the region to pilot an innovative water solution, something that could help their farm. And the rationale for that kind of approach is that farms are very specific in their topography, their soil, and their problems. And individuals on those farms, they know the problems and the solutions better than anyone else. And so we really wanted, as a philanthropic organization, to support that kind of problem solving. We funded 2 individuals who I'll introduce briefly. We funded Valerie here in Kuna, and we funded Susan Jacobson in Orofina in the Clearwater area. We've also got 2 other innovative farmers and ranchers down at the end. We've got Brooke Bonner and Wilder Jones, if that's right, thank you, who've also got regenerative and holistic practices that are also innovative in their complexity and in the way that they're solving problems specific to their ranch. I'm going to step aside now to introduce my other co-panelist, who is Maureen.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. My name is Maureen Pepper. I am the State Water Quality Specialist at the USDA-Natural Resources Conservation Service. I've been in the business of water quality 27 years now in various capacities. Water is really important to me. It is a career that I take very personally to support folks in improving water quality in their area, however they can, whether it's a homeowner, rancher, farmer, and communities alike. I'm with NRCS, as I said. We are part of USDA. We are a voluntary part of USDA. We do not regulate unless you are large, have a large animal feeding operation, something like that. Obviously, that is regulated. But what we do is support technically and financially farmers, ranchers, and private forest land owners to put conservation practices on the ground. Conservation practices in my side of the house means practices that support water quality and quantity. We know that water quality and quantity here in Idaho is extremely important, quantity being more of an issue every day. We are in a state of drought the last 20 years. I know that might sound odd because of all of the precipitation we've been getting lately, and last year was unprecedented. Some of our watersheds had over 300% water come, but that's 1 year. For us to get out of this state of drought, we would need at least probably 10 years of that level of water. Folks understanding the water cycle, I kind of say it as all the water we have now on this planet is all the water we'll ever have. It's a little bit hard to understand, but globally, our climate, it moves around. So we might get a lot of water this year, and we don't get a lot next year, but that lot of water we got might move to the East Coast or somewhere else on the planet, but it just keeps recirculating in the form of snow and rain, and it just keeps recirculating that way. The other issue here in Idaho, because we are a western state, we have water rights. And there are senior water rights and junior water rights. In the last few years, the junior water rights in particular it's getting more difficult for them because some of from 2 years ago, I think it was in the Wood River Valley, some of the farmers got cut off early from water because they were a junior water right holder and there wasn't enough water to get them through that season. So there's been a lot of change in what they're now planning to grow, because they need to grow things that don't take up so much water. Things like corn, alfalfa, potatoes are very water, require a lot of water. So there's a lot of that shift happening now. So water rights and water quantity and quality all come together, and Daniel and I were talking as we prepared to do this panel, is that at the end of the day, water is food security. For those that are distilling whiskey or whatever, like beer, growing hops, water is extremely important for that water quality and to grow the crops, because we all want to have healthy animals, productive crops, food, and especially for the organic farmers. So that quality is really important, and without the quality and quantity in tandem, it's really working against that food security. We want to be able to keep growing and producing that to supply our restaurants and supply our grocery stores and keep money on the table for y'all that are doing that. And so just in parting, we have a table out here, right as you walk through the front doors. It's got a green tablecloth on it. It says USDA. We are part of USDA. But come talk with us. We have our urban ag specialist at the table and myself that can help navigate you through NRCS. And if you haven't worked with NRCS yet, we have field offices all across the state that you can go in and talk with them about how you can improve things on your land and your bottom line. Thanks.
Super exciting. Thank you, Maureen. We're going to talk about water innovations in this session, but before we get into the problems, the solutions, and the innovation that kind of bind those two things, let's just get a chance to know the panelists. And I'm going to start with Wilder down at the end. Wilder, can you tell us a little bit about your background in agriculture and your connection to your farm?
Yeah, can y'all hear me all right? My name is Wilder Jones. I live in Glenns Ferry, Idaho. I grew up there, and I helped my father on his farm, King's Crown Organic Farm, and I started my own spin-off farm, Wild Spaces Farm, and I produce raw milk dairy products from a grass pasture-based system. I graduated from the University of Montana with a degree in natural resource conservation, and I'm first and foremost an ecologist, and then secondly a farmer. And so I care about Idaho, and I care about our natural resources, and just trying to be, I don't know, a lot of the innovations that I have are not novel. They're just a little bit of a regression.
Totally. Brooke, same question over to you.
Hey everyone, I am Brooke Bonner from Drinkers of the Wind over in Bellevue in the Wood River Valley. I am an accidental farmer. We inherited the ranch from my stepfather when he unexpectedly passed away a few years ago, and left behind my mom with 44 horses, a hay operation, a bunch of acreage, and no idea how to cope with it all and how to sustain it. So my husband and I moved to the ranch, and I read every darn farming book I could get my hands on to try and figure out if we were really gonna try and help her save the ranch and keep it intact and operational, which is what we decided to do. But horses are not my jam, so I decided to start converting. As she gets rid of horses, we are converting old, very, very compacted, really, really compromised soil conditions. We've been converting those pastures into a regenerative agroforestry system. So what that means is implementing berms and swales to conserve every drop of water that falls on the land, because while we have water rights, we don't really count on them in perpetuity, because, as Maureen said, water rights aren't necessarily a guarantee, as climate change really impacts us, and we see the impacts of that drought. So in the last year and a half, we've planted 3,000 fruit and nut trees and shrubs, 147 varieties, so we're really going the maximum diversity route to make my life as hard as possible. And yeah, we're looking forward to seeing increases in biodiversity, increases in soil health, carbon sequestration, water infiltration. really preventing any runoff from the property. So we're right on the river. So we don't want any water coming off with all of the horse manure that we have. We don't want that going into the water system. So the innovations that we've implemented are really helping with the water quantity and quality question.
Hi, my name is Susan Jacobson. I have Big Canyon Acres in Peck, Idaho, so up in the north central area. We have just been farming for about 5 years. We bought some property that was advertised that it had fruit and nut trees on it. Come to find out that following spring it was 272 fruit and nut trees. So we've got about 5 of our 48 acres is in fruit and nuts. So we began to learn about farming, and over the time we've kind of continue to have some success. We have apples, blackberries, cherries, pears, plums, walnuts, hazelnuts, raspberries. I'm trying to think what else I'm forgetting, but anyway, and 3 varieties in most of those items. And so we also both have outside full-time jobs. And so running that, as well as farming wasn't really paying the bills, so we started doing events and getting into agritourism. We have pretty successful festivals and wedding business as well on the side. And so just time and then understanding water rights, water needs, water usage, and starting to try and figure that all out. And so, we reached out to a friend of ours whose family's had an organic walnut farm in the north central area of California for over 100 years, and he's a pretty smart thinker. And so when this opportunity came available and we knew we were struggling with a lot of different overwatering, underwatering, lots of time spent, what to do, he helped us, and we were really grateful, and the innovations have made a difference.
My name is Valerie Timm. My husband Alex and I started Vista Farms about 3 years ago. We are first-generation farmers, and we are learning as we go. I would love to tell you that we purchased land with a picturesque big red barn with rolling hills and beautiful pastures for grazing with traditional row crops. It looks more like a tumbleweed kind of blowing in the high desert. We're about 20 minutes south of the airport here in Boise, and it's very dry, it's very windy, and we don't have a lot of access to water. We use our domestic well to manage our farm. And so we have to be really creative about how we use water and very, very conservative with what we have. We primarily grow lavender. We have about 2,500 plants that we hand planted a couple summers ago. We also work full time, so that was a weekend project. And we produce beef and pork and chicken eggs on a small scale direct to consumer. We have had about 100 local customers, mostly through Instagram, over the last 3 years, and it's just been really wonderful to see the response from our community. Lavender's been the perfect crop for us to grow because it doesn't require a lot of water, and it tolerates the high heat and wind really, really well for us. And so that's been a wonderful opportunity. You can harvest it fresh and dry and use it in a wide variety of culinary applications. We have an ice cream that we did with Snake River Creamery here locally last year that was wonderful. I ate it all. Sorry, I didn't bring any today. And there's a lot of soaps and lotions and different products you can do with it. So we're really excited to be kind of expanding on that and having pick festivals and just having a place for our community to come and gather and really be a part of a farm and do the agritourism as well.
Thanks, Valerie, and thanks to everyone. As I'm kind of diagnosing the portfolio of the panel that we have for you today, it's pretty diverse. There's individuals in northern Idaho and other parts of Idaho as well, working on different crops, working on different topographies, and really working with different problems. And that's what I'm seeing as the unifying thread in the panel, is that they're all problem solvers. And shooting back to the other side of the table with Wilder and Brooke, you guys are working on pretty complex ecosystem approaches to thinking about water and soil on your properties. And I wonder, Wilder, maybe starting with you, how are you diagnosing or thinking about the challenges on your farm? And could you tell us a little bit about what the problems are?
Yeah,
What the opportunities are as well.
right. Yeah, totally. I'll speak to just for some background. I'll speak to one particular parcel. It's 160 acres, and my father manages more than that, and it has different variables and different challenges and advantages, but the property that I run my micro dairy on is dissected by a creek that flows perennially. And on the eastern half, we have irrigation water that's delivered April through October through an irrigation district. And on the western half, it is water pulled from the creek, which is only available, although the stream's present, the flow to accommodate irrigation is only available March through sometimes July, but mostly March to June. So we have this kind of water guaranteed side of the property and then ephemeral water quantity on the other side. And in my particular area, there's not a lot of incentive for conservation of water. You pay for it and you can have it. And so there's not a lot of incentive to grow a drought tolerant crop, to implement drip tape, to try any particular technology or practice that conserves water, because it's not in the culture of the growers of that area. And so I suffer from a unique circumstance where, and I prefer my suffering. We flood irrigate, and for that I live in a swamp, a bit of a Shrek, if you will. And so my water issues are typically too much water in one particular area, not enough water moving through my farm quickly enough at times, or stagnating in spots that I wish it wasn't, and I still end up with dry spots and saturated spots. So just to try to paint a little picture, it's like a little, southern Idaho riparian paradise. We have willows and both of the shrub and tree type, and lots of pasture, cattails, reeds. And so I have a series of ponds that have been constructed to kind of help the water manifest at the surface in the form of open water and not just be saturated wetland. And so I'm kind of like taking out my wetland, but ultimately growing more wetland at the same time, because the water's always there. It's just whether or not it's in soil or in a pond. And so, yeah, my challenges are uniquely different in that it's like I have plenty of water and I need it to move through my farm quickly, and not necessarily quickly, but effectively. And so earthworks that slow water down, spread water, and sink water are what I'm interested in. And then also utilizing other types of, not just crops, but just plants in general, plants that want to use water to grow. So trees, both the root system pushes water down as well as pulls water up, and their water demands are different than grass. And so just trying to take this perspective that my farm has a resource that we all cherish and love in this state, not to squander it, not to cuss it, and to find out the best way to still, run some enterprises on the farm. Difficult. But basically, try to play beaver as much as possible.
Thanks, Wilder. And Brooke, I know as we were talking this morning and as we're corresponding, a lot of those themes that Wilder just talked about were true for you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Live stream, you okay? Did that die? No. I think that it's, for us, water is a little bit of feast and famine. Last year, as Maureen said, it was huge water. Like, we didn't have to turn on irrigation until early July, which is totally unheard of and was great. But the previous year, they diverted the last of the Wood River. Like, it went dry on our property, which is completely unheard of. I'd never seen the river not running. And that was terrifying and horrifying and just all the thing, a real wake-up call and slap in the face. And so figuring out how we can do an agricultural system that is resilient to this feast and famine water system that we have going as the climate gets weirder and weirder. But then also, how do we even it out as much as possible through our farm practices? And I think that's one of the really great opportunities with these regenerative Burman swale systems, a lot of what Wilder's talking about, doing the slowing, spreading, and sinking, you can really charge your own system when the water comes and take maximum advantage of the water when it does fall, sink it into the soil, recharge the aquifer as much as possible, and that gives you a little bit extra buffer when the drought comes or when the rains don't fall or the snow doesn't come. So I think that that's what we're looking at, is how do we both safeguard the resource while we have it, but then try and mitigate these negative climate things that are going on to elongate the resource and really help ensure that we have it going forward and that our system is as resilient as possible to the craziness that we're seeing, and that we can still feed our community and still grow our crops and take care of our animals and all of those things.
I'm curious, I'm going to stick with the two of you at the end. You're talking about complex ecosystem services using not just one approach, but many different approaches. Yes. If you were to say, like, how did you learn about these, and how did you make the decision to say, I'm going to press play on this set of operations and actions?
Well, as I mentioned, I read every values-aligned farming book that I could literally find. So if anybody wants a reading list, I would be happy. I meant to bring a stack of books, but I flew in and that didn't work out. That was too heavy. So I have a very extensive reading recommendation. Mark Shepard's Restoration Agriculture really was, if I had to point to one, that would be the one. If you have a plot of land and you are interested in maximizing the amount of food and nutrition you can get out of it, that is an amazing book, while conserving the water and protecting that resource and increasing biodiversity and soil health and all of those good things that a lot of us in the regenerative and sustainable world are talking about. But that sort of became my manual, and you can see those themes in a bunch of other books, a bunch of other resources. It's not the only source, but it's definitely a really good summary. Yeah.
And then I'm curious, Wilder, you're an ecologist. You're trained in the field. Where did you learn about the practices that you took on?
Yeah, I've before I finally got stamped and got the paper to go on the wall, I had to go through the ranks of being totally dissatisfied with institutional education and totally against it. And in that rise and fall, I get to use the P word. I was blessed to have been taken in by the permaculture community, which is a very ambiguous and undefined word and territory. But regardless, it's just a framework for thinking through resource issues, and that framework often looks towards stacking of functions and creating a system of complexity that plays off of each other. So just within that training of hanging out with permaculturists, I got exposed to some people that have really dove in on water. One gentleman who doesn't get enough recognition, and he was at the plight of World War II, but his name is Victor Schauberger, and he's really hard to track down if you're able to find any of his literature. But he's an Austrian naturalist and scientist, and he has a lot of profound information about how water moves and the physics of water, as well as Brad Lancaster, who is in Tucson, and he has many volumes about rainwater harvesting. And so he has both your residential, urban land manipulation practices, as well as your kind of rural countryside farm level practices. So just being exposed to people that are intimately concerned about how to grow food with the hand that you've been dealt really introduced me to different ways of managing water. And that's, I think, as we talk about what to do with water, we have to talk about what to do with ourselves and what to do with our community and our bioregion.
Thanks for that comment, Wilder. Susan, I know your property and your challenge and your solution was also quite unique. Could you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. So, like I said, we have about 5 acres in fruit and nut, but we have 48 acres total. We do have both a creek that runs through as well as a spring, and then we have our home well as well. But just kind of looking at the delivery system and what we were doing, and so there was an existing pipes in the ground with hose bibs and hoses on top. And so when we bought the place, it was like, here's the sprinklers, here's the hoses, good luck. They hadn't maintained the orchard since the 1980s. And so when we bought it, it was really overgrown and was producing a little bit, but not so great. And so fortunately, University of Idaho and their small farms and Colette DePhelps, and that program is a huge resource. So if you're a starting farmer, I strongly recommend the program. Actually, that's what connected us to LOR. Was I'm part of the Palouse Clearwater Food Coalition, and he was on a call one day. But that information was there. So starting to learn like just how do we care for this thing? Spring came and it wasn't just these like 20 trees we saw on the side of the house. It was 272 and counting. And because we wander through the hillside and, oh, look, there's more of them. So, but anyway, kind of figuring out, okay, what does the water delivery system look like? How can we do this? We both have full-time jobs. So we're hauling hoses and putting them, in their spot, if you will, which I didn't know the spot. Husband knew the spot. That's not the right spot you put it in today. So only really one person could water properly. But he's hauling hose, and so this end of the line gets this much water, but this end of the line gets that much water because it took us this long to move this one. And anyway, we couldn't go anywhere. Very tied to the farm. And just the time that it took, and especially on the hot days. So climate in the area that we're in the Clearwater River Valley area. So we have more mild climate maybe than some other parts of the state. And so that's how we're able to grow all these fruits. There's like several, our orchard used to have 50 peach trees as well, but the people before us, they had cut all those down because it was just too much, all of that. And they weren't maintaining what was there. And so somebody wanted all of the fruit for his smoker or the wood for all of his smokers. So she just let him take the whole orchard out. But anyway, so that's a solution, though. Let's just be solution-oriented, right? So anyway, just kind of looking at how do we do this more efficient. And like I said, I reached out to somebody I know that he's just a really smart thinker when it comes to solutions and ideas for solving issues, especially on farms. And asked him what are some of the things he's tried down in his area. And now, like Daniel said, all of our farms are different. Every location is different. We have all these microclimates within that. What do you do? So I took like 20 ideas he had that I could understand. And then, because he's very scientific, and I'm not, and then round those by the extension office and talk to also Colette, small farms, to find out if anybody was doing any of these things, which none of them they were. So I narrowed that to 10 that I really understood. And then from there, we kind of came up with like 5 or 6 we thought we could implement. And so the ones that we did the most seems kind of like a no-brainer. We put in an in-ground timed system. So we're not losing water at the drip level on the hose bib, the sprinklers that are not really efficient doing their thing, and they're watering areas they don't need to. We put in a sprinkler system, basically. And it's timed, and it has stages like one that would be in your backyard. So we're doing like 6 acres. It's, not all 48 acres. And that's actually delivering really great results to the areas. And it's timed and measured, and a guy's not hauling hose. We are still turning on hand valves. We have the goal to have it all like linked in a system where it goes, but so there was some technical difficulties with that. So know that trial and error, things fail, and that's okay. We learned that too. And then the other piece that was kind of a big game changer that we really see going forward is, I don't know if you guys are familiar with PMS Industries. They make a pressure, they call it pressure bomb or a pressure chamber. And this tool, they have ones that are hand pumped, which is what we got. It's a less expensive version. And then ones that are with CO2 bottles that it'll do it on its own. And for a very simplified description, it takes the leaf or the blade of grass or whatever it is you're trying to measure the hydration level in, puts it sort of like it goes into a packet that you put on the tree, collects, then it goes into this chamber, and it creates like a vise on it, for lack of a better way to describe it simply, and then water bubbles out of it. And the point at which the pressure is applied tells you what your hydration system is in that plant. So you can use this. I could just go around the orchard and measure my hydration levels in the trees in different areas. And so we had a lot of water up there last year as well, the beginning of the season. Just when that thing came and we were kind of trying to figure out how to use it, there was, water was coming right away out of the leaves. And then later in the year, not so much. And so now this coming year, we're really looking forward to having the sprinklers going on their system and measuring and being able to, it's going to allow us to know is, a lot of these, is, like I said, it's a very established orchard. I really probably don't need very much water, especially in the apple trees. And so in times of heat, or we do get, 100-degree days. So now I should be able to regulate it.
Thanks, Susan. And there's a third grader inside of me that says there's a show and tell product in front of Valerie. Valerie, could you tell us a little bit about your project?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, we're watering our lavender fields off of our domestic well, and we have to go almost 600 feet deep to get water where we are. So we had looked into things like doing an agricultural well. You don't want to know how much that costs. And it also doesn't really, help us conserve water in the right way. And so we needed to look at how we can just use our natural resources of what we have with our lavender irrigation. And this was the first irrigation project we had really taken on. Our land had not been farmed before. So it was a lot of clearing rocks and weeds and just kind of making this space for about an acre of lavender. My husband and I went to about 10 different lavender farms in Idaho, Washington, and Oregon to learn from what was working well for them and try to apply that back on our farm. We thought that we had done all of our research in our irrigation system, and we put down about 9,000 feet of this drip tape that I have here. It's very thin. We'll have these back at our booth too if you want to take a look at it. It's right out here on the 5th floor. But mice and rabbits chewed this all summer long. It was very hot, and there's not a lot of natural water sources for them, so we provided it. And spent about 10 hours a week repairing the breaks and the stretching that the sun would, it would be really hot, and then we're putting cold water through these lines, so we'd be splicing it to try and fix where they had chewed it, and then that would pop off. And so every time we were watering, we were walking up and down all of these rows, like 300-foot rows, to try and find these issues. And that was not a good use of our time. We did not want to do that long term. And it was also not really efficient use of our water because we're having to find these breaks. We're not getting the root to the root of the plant where we want that water to establish these plants. Once lavender is established, we can water it once a month, or every 2 weeks, which sounds kind of crazy to not have to water it that often, but as they're getting established, it's kind of 2 to 3 times a week. And of course, this was one of the hottest summers that we had in 2022, so there were a lot of days that were above 100 degrees, and we were really worried about our crop being successful long term. So with the support of the LOR Foundation grant, it came at a great time. We were able to replace all 9,000 feet of our tubing by hand with this thicker 3/4-inch poly tubing here. And this was much harder for them to chew through. We originally used it for a main water line and then had the irrigation kind of running off of it. And that's kind of how we found the innovation, which it's not a novel innovation either. But when we were looking on online forums and how do we solve this problem, there were no solutions out there. No one was really recommending it or having the same problem that we were having. So this was a great solution for us, and it was kind of right in front of our faces. I mean, they weren't chewing this. So we had to go through and hand punch 2,500 holes to put the emitters right on the plant, which was actually wonderful. This was a pre-drilled hole, about 3 feet apart. That's how we have them spaced. And we thought that was great. That was going to save us a lot of time. what we learned was if you are off by an inch 300 times when you're hand planting, the pre-drilled emitter is not your friend. So you do actually want to punch the holes in this, and that'll save you a lot of headache in the long run. So it's been a wonderful transformation. We went from 10 hours a week trying to fix this problem to just being able to really turn on those zones and do a quick check and walk away, and it's eliminated our time that we had to spend there, so we can spend more time weeding, which is our next problem to tackle.
I'm gonna move that. Okay, so in this next part, we want to talk about peer-to-peer learning and how important it is. And so the questions will really surround around that. Things, what have you learned so far? Pieces of advice you'd give to your neighbors, and would you do it again? And how would you do it differently? And we'll just start back with you. One of the things I picked up on that you said that you went all around to the different lavender farms to learn. So what have you learned so far? Anything new today or recently that you might want to apply going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we learned through this process that it's not always a one-size-fits-all kind of solution. So what worked for almost all of those other lavender farms did not work for us in our environment. They didn't have the jackrabbit problem that we were experiencing. And so I think that's kind of a nice thing to keep in mind, is that when you are looking, you can take information from other people that have come before you and have done it. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, but just to consider what kind of variables and conditions are different in your application. And then also reframing the questions when you're trying to solve a problem that feels like it doesn't have a solution. We kind of went down the path of, well, how do we deal with the mice and the rabbits to get rid of that problem? Well, we're never going to be able to get rid of the mice and the rabbits. They're always going to be there. So how do we work with them to solve that problem? I did go down a long rabbit hole, no pun intended, on this entire article from the 1970s about jackrabbits in our area and talking about how to fix that or work with them. And it was a very long article, and at the end it basically said, there's nothing you can do. And that moment was defeating. But it was really, the answer was just right under our feet the whole time. We have irrigation line that's working, we're just not applying it in the right way. And so I think just reframing the way that you're thinking about a problem you can't solve. We went externally to try and find the answer and couldn't find it, and it was right there the whole time.
That was a great summary. I think you addressed all of the questions all at once. So Susan, I'll go to you next on the same, what you've learned, anything today, recently, would you do it again? What advice would you give to a neighboring?
Yeah, thank you. And actually, I just learned from Valerie, one of the things she'd said was that the heat caused some of the things to expand and contract. And one of the innovation initially in our plan was that we were going to put an overhead system, because they do that in some areas in Washington where they go overhead, branch to branch in the canopy of the apple trees in the orchard. But I had talked with a couple local growers and then somebody down at our nursery. So just same thing, what do we need to know about this region? And she's like, well, this was the gal at the nursery. Because the sun, we live in these tight valleys, so the sun's not out often. They have horrible mold issue then because the water droplets sit too long in that kind of watering environment. And she's like, I'd really reconsider that overhead, and I didn't even think about the sun and stuff shrinking. They may not have worked this summer anyway. So there you go. But anyway, I think it's listening to others talk about things. And so, like I said, I go to a lot of extension classes, and you just hear conversation like this where you go, oh, that could work for me. I think reaching out to other types of farmers, reading, and then I think there's a little bit of that trial and error component, of learning. One thing I'll say that we learned in ours was that there were existing pipes underground. We're dealing with where the irrigation source is, and then we're in a canyon, so it's sloped. And so we've got a lift that's going on that's got to happen to get up to those areas. So we first laid down one diameter of pipe, and when it got to the end of the line, wasn't enough. And so actually some of that we're going to be digging back up and going with a bigger one because we weren't getting the delivery we needed to cover some of the cover crop areas. But then the other thing is, don't assume. If you have something in ground already that someone else did and you think it's attached to a hose bib, don't be so sure. because we added on to that existing line in some terminal stations, right, in some of the zones, and then we go and flip this thing, and this freaking sprinkler pops up like way over here, barely too, because it's like it's way out at the end of the thing. So just maybe run some tests and things of what the system you have and try and figure out, even though you think you know, you may not, and laugh at yourself because it happens, you're going to be frustrated. But ultimately, like Valerie said, the amount of time that we saved, probably at least 10 to 12 hours a week in hauling hose and dealing with just other issues in that hose piece and replacing sprinklers all the time and, all of that. So, yeah. And I mean, the big goal is really like to actually have someone else watch. Like I'm allowed to turn on the valves now. But we might even have someone else that could come stay there and do it for us. So that's important to get off the farm sometimes. Does that answer all the questions?
I think so. Yeah. That's a great lifelong piece of advice of don't assume. And something to think about too about how you have moved to the improved irrigation, things like that. If you are paying people to do that for you, it's a lot of labor costs involved if you have people doing that for you. So another way to think about irrigation, water management, and innovation is doing it just to make it easier so you don't have those extra costs.
And finding labor. I mean, we all know
Yes.
finding labor is a big problem now too, is just getting workers that want to work. And so aside from the costs of people like helping with that, finding that body isn't there. And so now, like my mom that moved onto our property, the goal would be we go out of town, she could just go turn it on and look maybe, instead of a caretaker that's there the whole time.
Right. And the same to you, Brooke. What have you learned? What advice would you give? And what was the last one? Would you do it again?
Mm-hmm. In terms of the peer-to-peer learning, I think that is critical and a double-edged sword. I think that it is really great to go and look at what other people are doing and talk to other farmers and see what's working and what's not working. But I also think you can't be afraid to innovate and to be the weirdo on the block and to do something that is a little bit revolutionary, because farmers, we can be a conservative lot and, afraid of change and things like that. So really being willing to go out on a limb and try something that maybe they've learned in other countries, but not in Idaho, So I think looking at that from both sides is really important. What was the middle thing? Would I do it again? Absolutely. We did learn a lot from a person who came over who has done these systems in Colorado high desert. So making sure that whoever you're talking to and working with actually has a similar ecology and climate, because obviously it's very, very different circumstances. And then we have friends who have done similar systems over in McCall. And so talking with them over time and how are these things working and how are they not, and making sure that you can sort of find your tribe to work with and continue to innovate and learn from is great. But if we had not done these earthworks at the beginning of the project, I can tell you it would be a massively harder system to deal with. Just in a year and a half from when we put in our berms and swales and did all of that. And it's a huge investment, to be honest. It's a ton of work, it's a ton of energy, it's a lot of bulldozing and things like that. But what was a completely compacted pasture where water would pool and just make this disgusting muck in the spring and sit at the bottom and fester for a month, now it is this gorgeous green cover cropped, zero pooling this spring, this last spring where there was so much water and so much snow melt and so much rainfall, we had zero pooling. Whereas my images from the year before, it was horrible in that field. So just over a year of doing earthworks and then a round of cover crop transformed it. So well worth it.
What is the second question?
I think I skipped it.
What have you learned so far, and how are you planning to implement that going forward? One piece of advice you could give to a neighbor on a project, and what would that be? And would you do it again?
Yeah, I'll steal some stuff from everyone around me because nothing I have to say is very novel. The freest energy you have is sweat, and so I flood irrigate not because I have never heard of pivots, but because I don't have an electrical bill to water my property, and that's huge. And that's from Nate Jones back there. For a little bit of sweat, we can get this place watered. And so that's your freest energy, and I think that's really important as we talk about, labor savings or systems for the future. I mean, it's like we're trying to absolve ourselves from the responsibility of taking care of ourselves, but we all have gym memberships. And so I've invited a peer who I met in Southern California, and you all are invited to the farm. I invite everybody to the farm, but I met this gentleman who's a practitioner. And I'd seen what he did to his place, and I thought, holy cow, I got to have you look at my place, and it just like it overcame me because I've been there for 8 years, and I have a vision of what I'd like my enterprises to do, but then to finally be in the presence of someone where it was like, stuff I don't, and I will listen to you, because I don't necessarily listen to experts or specialists. And so those are pieces of advice too. And so yeah, I would definitely do it again, and I definitely would learn from your peers. And if you have any inclination to do something that's historically relevant but not relevant today, it's time to get on the boat and ask who you can, who's still alive. There's not a lot of, I'm one of the last flood irrigators in my area, and now we're running out of them in Idaho in general. So the people that know how to finesse water. I'm not a very good flood irrigator, and there's a spectrum of being able to do it well. And so that's a really interesting, just like with my innovations aside, just to do what I have with what I've already got, those resource extension agents don't have that wealth of knowledge any longer. That's not being pushed through any of our institutions or even our for-profit businesses that sell irrigation infrastructure. It's not about, flooding anymore. And so finding your experts, they might be old and they might not come out, but they've got lots of valuable information. And so I would totally do it again because it aligns with my values.
Thank you, Wilder. And can we give our panelists a hand of applause? Thanks, everyone. This is a nice, tidy 45-minute. I'm going to call it an appetizer since we're at a food and bev kind of convention here. All of these individuals are here for the day. 3 of them have booths. Go say hi to them. Go introduce yourself. They're obviously, they have a wealth of expertise. They're also interested in sharing their innovations with you and talking to you and learning with you. Thank you for attending this panel. I'm Daniel Reed with the LOR Foundation. We have Maureen Pepper with the NRCS. Thank you so much. We are taking questions.
So with everybody that's talking about water, do you know with all the growth that's going on in Idaho, is there any bills or legislations coming up to help preserve and making sure that not only are the farmers doing their job, but the urban areas that are coming into our community are also helping preserve and watch our water? Is there any, for all of us that are in this room, is there legislation that we should be paying attention to? Is there legislators that are fighting for our water rights? What do we need to be paying attention to in that area?
That's a great
That's
question.
a great question.
Yeah,
you have an answer.
I'm part of the team that a grant through the National Science Foundation was just awarded to a local hydrologist who put together an interdisciplinary team of hydrologists, water experts, federal and state partners to look at adaptive water solutions for basically starting Treasure Valley the first year, and then if they're awarded the 3-year, it would be statewide, but basically the pilot of how we confront climate change. I'm on the documentary film portion of it, of how we tell the story of the water, knowing that the data doesn't always reach larger audiences. So it's not a legislative effort, but a broader, hey, how do we address the problem from multiple stakeholders, urban and rural water use?
Yeah, the the famous trope in Idaho is that water conservation means using it before it gets to Oregon. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't follow particular pieces of policy, but your question is very important because we have to talk about development, and it's really interesting, and where we are, where we pay for water with no limits. If you build a home on an acre, but you were promised an inch, but your house takes up this much room, your RV takes up that much room, your apron to your garage takes up that much room, so you still get an inch, but you have half an acre of growing space now. Does that mean that we should have another half inch of water spread over half an acre somewhere else, or should we cut our use? Should you pay for less? I mean, these are questions that have to be answered, like water district to water district, irrigation canal to irrigation canal, county to P&Z, and so I would say get involved at the most local level so that you can be informed. I have the same questions all the time. I see lots of like aggressive water saving or water infrastructure plans, and it's like, are we doing this because they built this town and they don't have any water, or they want to expand this town so they need some water? Mountain homes, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, we do have water rights, and we have mountains of ancient hand line from my stepdad that we lug about as needed, so that's a delight. But yes, to get the trees established, I do expect that we'll have to water for a few years, but the goal is to be able to wean them off of irrigation entirely, if possible. So we're doing a sort of classic alley crop system where there's trees in the swales and some shrubs on the berms, and then grain crop and pasture in the alleys. So my goal in the next year is to do a drip system along the berms that hopefully, they have charts of how water flows in these systems and then sort of plumes underneath. So I'm hoping if I just water the berm and nothing else, that it will actually plume under and feed the whole system. So we're experimenting with that.
Any further questions? All right. Oh, we do have a further question.
I did NRCS equip grants. It's interesting each year. It feels like the NRCS priorities change, so they're funding this thing but not that thing that they used to, and so you really just have to communicate with your local agent. But it's October is the timeline, so get that in.
April 5th and October 5th.
Yeah, well, it depends on which thing. Yeah, so tracking that is really hard, so just talk to your NRCS person all the time, because trying to figure it out on the internet is totally freaking impossible as far as I've been able to figure out. Yeah, communicate with them. But we did equip grants for orchard establishment and cover cropping and alley cropping, so things like that, and then a Forest Service NRCS co-grant for forest management.
I'm Maureen Pepper, and I'm with NRCS. So I can tell you what we call the EQIP second sign-up deadline is April 5th, and then the next round will be October, whatever that first. It's usually on a Friday, ending the week. I don't know that date yet, but right now we have unprecedented funding, and we also do offer conservation innovation grants. So even if you do want to just do stuff out of the box, go for it. We can fund a lot of things. I think a lot of folks don't know about us or don't understand what we do. We pretty much, there's a program available for everyone, and more funding is available if you want to do water conservation projects. I oversee that. I'm a water quality specialist. But there's also historically underserved, women-owned, veteran-owned. There are so many different programs, I can't even list them all, including land conservation, keeping land in farming. We have to find a way to continue to feed people and not develop the homes. But we have a booth out here. It's the green tablecloth out there, and we can get you to the local folks. We have field offices across the state, pretty much everywhere. So talk with them locally, and some of our funding right now, we can, depending what you want to do, we can fund it nearly immediately. There's an opportunity, it's called Act Now. So we're funding a lot of stuff that doesn't require a lot of cultural resources or endangered species reviews, things like that, anything that's kind of surface, not a lot, basically once you break ground, things kind of change. But that's all available right now, so thanks.
Just very briefly on the philanthropic side of things, one of the reasons that we decided to launch Fieldwork, which was the initiative that funded these two ladies right here, is that we do know that the issue of timing and allocation of resources from government entities, they're doing great work, they're protecting the taxpayer, and they're doing that in an appropriate way, but philanthropy has a different lane to play in. So our organization, the LOR Foundation, was trying to get funding out within 4 to 6 weeks from application. We tried to lighten the burden of application and really work with farmers and ranchers on things that government couldn't fund. So it's kind of a parallel. We're both playing in the same pool, but we're in different lanes, and that's exactly where we want to be. We want to be funding innovation across the board. We're seeing a lot of our philanthropic peers step into that space, and we broadly recognize that application is something that we can do, that we can ease the burden on. However, those philanthropic institutions are often regionally based, and so they might work in the Colorado River or in the Snake River exclusively or statewide. And we're trying to understand, like as a LOR Foundation who funds across states from New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho, how we can encourage more of our peers to really find not just the regions that are most important to them, but people who are most likely to be the seed and the spark of innovation. And that's what we'll be continuing to do. We don't have a funding stream right now, but things will change and are likely to change in the future. So I would love to keep everyone, up to date about what our organization is doing, as well as the philanthropic kind of space, because there is a lot of interest in how we can all use water, more efficiently, more smartly, for the betterment of our communities. With that, I know there's another group that's going to be popping in here shortly. So once again, a hand for our panelists and Maureen. Thank you.